your laptop? Absolutely. It's on. What time is it?
Ready.
Did you get a chance to eat?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Oh, it's on. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna. I think my second. Well, I might need to bring up my presentation really quickly, or I can do it afterwards too. I can do it as I chat. I don't want to interrupt
Okay.
the flow of this.
All right.
Yeah. A video that I didn't think about bringing up, but I could, while the introductions are being done, maybe. Was it easy to do audio?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think I'm only having video for you. I'm sorry.
No,
about
no, no,
that.
no, no. It
I'm
was just
counting on slides.
no. It was just a random thought.
Yeah.
All good.
Thank you for asking
Yeah, of
and not
course.
surprising us with it.
No, no, no. Yeah, I've done enough of these, and I have
Yeah,
my
for
IT team
sure.
who
No, yeah, that's clear.
when we have visitors to come in and speak, they're like, "I want to do this," but no, no, you're not.
Could you not have told us?
Right.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, both in person and virtually. My name is Susie, and I will be reading our land acknowledgement today, then I'll hand it off to Jamelia. So we honor the original people, the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. We recognize that Grand Rapids Community College is located on the land ceded to the United States in the Chicago Treaty of 1821. We also recognize the Grand River Bands of Ottawa Indians as the descendants of original tribes represented at this treaty's signing. We express our gratitude to the original peoples, past, present, and future, who have stewarded this land for generations. We understand this acknowledgement must be coupled with a relationship of advocacy and support for Indigenous peoples. We recognize our responsibility to continuously uphold our commitments towards Indigenous communities. This land acknowledgement recognizes the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples and affirms their history and our efforts to be accountable to their needs. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. So thank you for joining us both in person and online. Like Susie said, my name is Jamelia Hardley. I serve as the director of the Woodrick Center for Inclusion and Multicultural Affairs, and we are excited to kick off our second of two sessions today with our speaker today. So just a few things. If you are joining us for the first time for the Diversity Lecture Series, we'll run through just an overview of the why. I'll cover some logistical aspects, and then we'll go ahead and introduce today's speaker. The 30th Diversity Lecture Series has served for many years to create a space to accomplish so many different things in a short period of time. As we begin today's conversation, I want to invite you all to lean in and challenge yourselves to reflect, take time to develop and reflect and learn during our time together, and spread the knowledge to those who you interact with on a daily basis. The lecture series is designed to do the following things: promote inclusivity, encourage continued dialogue, prepare students, staff, faculty, and our community for navigating diverse spaces, foster civic responsibility, support and give a platform to diverse voices, build cultural awareness, and do so much more. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us both in person and virtually. A few housekeeping things. So if you are in person, or online, there will be a portion in today's session where we'll do a Q&A. After the presentation, you will have the opportunity to engage or ask any questions. There will be a QR code for our virtual folks that will pop up on the screen during this time. And if you are in our audience in person, we will make sure that you have the mic so that you're able to participate and ask any questions that you see fit. We just ask that you just kind of let us know, and we'll make sure that you're accommodated for. As far as feedback, these conversations would not happen without your feedback and your participation. So at the end of the presentation, there'll be another QR code for you to be able to provide us with feedback so that we can continue to plan future lecture series and explore innovative ways to keep these important conversations flourishing. We want to make sure that we hear from our participants and our audience. That way we are able to make sure that your voice is represented in the different things that we continue to do within our office. I also want to take a moment just to thank a few folks who have made today's session happen. I want to thank our media team for being phenomenal and making sure our equipment and technology is up to par. I want to thank Leanne from Transfer to Bridges for providing and helping us be able to replenish and refuel ourselves with a nice meal in between sessions. I also want to thank Creative Dining for also being able to participate and provide the meal as well. And I also want to give a special shout out to Steelcase, who also helped sponsor these different sessions and lecture series events. So if you are interested in supporting the lecture series in the future, please let us know. You can email us at wcima@grcc.edu. And that concludes all of the housekeeping items that I have for you today. And now I will pass it to our Office Campus Impact Fellow, Natalie, to introduce our highlighted speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dave holds a master's degree in New Eastern Studies and Arabic from Wayne State University. He joined the Arab American National Museum in January 2011. As an educator and public programmer, Dave conducts educational presentations and workshops, both in person and online. He leads the planning and implementation of youth programs and cultural events, such as the SURA, Arts Academy, a youth photography program. He is the curator of the Arab Film Festival and oversees all film programming at AANM. He proudly serves on the board of the Anton Art Center, Macomb County Pride, Friends of the Detroit Film Theater, and the AFT. Dave identifies as a third-generation Arab American whose family comes from Lebanon. He dabbles a little in the film industry, is a proud cat dad of 2, and is always up for a good political debate. Now I leave you with Dave Serio.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys for the warm introduction. Thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be here at GRCC. And thanks to all the hard work that Jamelia and Natalie and your team have been doing. So thank you for including me as part of this. And I second the thoughtfulness and thank you for the lunch. I'm fighting a food coma, so if I bump into the mic, apologies. But yeah, so anyways, as was mentioned, my name is Dave. I am the curator of education over at the Arab American National Museum, which is a very special institution. It's the first and only museum of its kind in the entire country that is dedicated to uplifting and sharing the story of Arab Americans. It creates a place of belonging. It creates a place of inclusion. We'll talk a bit more about this, but as a young Arab American myself, I never saw myself, my story, my family, included in any of the K through 12 curriculum that I was learning in school. All I ever heard of was us versus them, usually in political context, right? The US as the good guy, and the Arab countries, whichever Arab country or people you're talking about, as kind of like the bad guy, right? And so when I came to the museum as a guest and now as an employee, it's a really special place, and it really does help to uplift and share personal and positive narratives with the community, some of whom come through our doors and have never met an Arab American before in their life. So it's a really essential institution, and the fact that we're the only museum of its kind in the whole country makes us that much more of an essential institution to come and visit. So I hope that you'll come and visit the museum at some point in the near future. I can verify we are 2 hours and 33 minutes away from my drive this morning, so not too far away. A little bit more about the museum. So the museum itself is a very proud Smithsonian affiliate. Anybody ever been to DC, been to the museums out in DC? Okay, so we're a proud Smithsonian affiliate. We work with the Smithsonian museums in DC. We're also a very proud accredited institution, which basically means everything that we do, everything that you see, everything you don't see, is held to a standard of excellence. And so for a museum to receive accreditation status, that's a really, really big badge of honor. We opened our doors May 5th, 2005, so we're coming up on our 20-year anniversary, which is also kind of a big deal. And lastly, we were founded because of our community. Pre-2005, before the museum existed, our community noticed that the only way our community was talked about was in news, in Hollywood cinema, and those are obviously very problematic spaces sometimes. And so our community said, you know what, we need our own space to create a sense of belonging, to create this identity, to share these personal narratives, to dispel stereotypes. Let's build that institution. If we want it bad enough, let's build it so that we can create it, kind of take control back in the narrative. And that's really why the museum exists and continues to do the work that we do. So before we jump into more nitty-gritty specifics, it's always good to kind of identify who we're talking about. If we're talking about Arab American stories and perspectives and a sense of belonging and storytelling, it's always good to kind of identify what parts of the world we're talking about when we reference Arab Americans. So if you look at the map, you'll be able to see the countries that are highlighted in the various orange shades are a part of the Arab world. Now, there's a few things to kind of unpack with this map. First thing is identifying how many Arab countries we have. So can anybody take a guess as to how many Arab countries we have identified on our map? And feel free to guess. 25 is really close. 17 is also very close. We're in the middle of those two. Any other ideas or guesses? 21. Super, super close. I feel like this is The Price is Right. Higher, higher. Too high. 22. Very good. There are no freebie answers from me. I'll make you work for your answers. Yes, there are 22 Arab countries. There are 10 in Northern Africa and 12 in Southwestern Asia, making, of course, our 22 countries. You can see that it spans over a really large swath of territory. So this is, it's a very large part of the world, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean all the way through Northern Africa and into Southwestern Asia. Now, you'll notice that we don't use the term Middle Eastern by itself. If we think of the term Middle East as it relates to our Arab world map, what are some pretty key differences? So if you envision a map of the Middle East in your head, or if you go to Google and want to look it up really quickly, how does the map of the Middle East differ from the map that you all see up here? What are some pretty key differences between our map and a map of the Middle East? Very good, right? So in most Middle Eastern maps, it stops at Egypt and ignores most of the North African countries. And on the other side of that, Middle Eastern maps include countries like Iran and Turkey, sometimes Afghanistan, that are not Arab countries by definition, which we'll talk about in a minute, but are seen as Middle Eastern through the lens mostly of where the definition comes from, mostly the West, right? And so the term Middle East is something that was really created by European folks, specifically the British. What they did is they sectioned off the world as they saw it in relation to themselves, and anything that was east of Britain, for example, but close, would be nicknamed the Near East, because it logically makes sense to them, right? Anything far from them, like China, Japan, and those countries, would be nicknamed the Far East. Again, makes sense to the British. And then the Middle East just happened to be this blob of land kind of in between near and far. So that's where the term Middle East comes from. And if you look at multiple maps of the Middle East, there can be some discrepancy. There could be some changes. Some maps include Afghanistan, some don't. Some include Libya, some don't. Whereas the Arab world is much more constant, right? This map doesn't waver. These are the 22 countries that are Arab. And they're Arab for 3 different reasons. So what do you think unifies our 22 countries together? What do you think they would share? What do you think the people that live in these countries might have in common? Very good guess. So religion is often thought of as one of those unifying factors, but it's not necessarily religion, and we'll talk about why that is in just a minute. But that's a really, really good guess. But if it's not religion, what else might unify a group of people together? Very good. So there's a shared history and culture between our 22 countries. Now, anytime we talk about unifying pieces, we'll highlight the similarities, but we'll also highlight the differences, right? Food is a really, really good example of this similar/different context with culture. In Dearborn, we have a lot of really delicious restaurants. We have a lot of Lebanese restaurants, which is where my family's from, Lebanon. We also have a lot of Yemeni restaurants that have popped up. And if you go to both of those restaurants, you'll see some similarities with the food and the ingredients that are used, but you'll also see a lot of differences, right? So the spices used in Lebanese cuisine is going to be a little bit different than you'll find in Yemeni cuisine, which has a lot more, in my opinion, warmer spices, just something a bit different. And there's also national cuisines related to each of our Arab countries. So the cuisine in Palestine is going to be very different from the cuisine in Morocco, which is going to differ from Somali cuisine. Even like falafel. Have folks had falafel before? Okay, if you haven't had falafel, eat it. It's delicious, vegetarian, very tasty. But the way falafel is made is very different from country to country. Like I have a good friend from Sudan, and her mom made falafel one time, and it was very different, equally as delicious. But just as an example, you'll find dishes that you have across the Arab world, but how they're prepared, the spices that are used are going to be very different from region to region. Even within each country, there's different spices and ways to prepare food. So that's just one example of similar but difference with culture. What else would unify our countries? There's 2 other things. Very good. So language is one of our other unifying factors. All 22 countries, of course, have Arabic and speak Arabic and have Arabic as their official language. Again, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of differences, though, too. So the unifying piece is more of the proper Arabic. So if you are in the school systems, if you're reading the newspapers, watching the news, that's more proper Arabic. And if you speak proper Arabic, you're able to communicate very well throughout the Arab world, right? The dialects, though, is where we have a lot of differences. So again, my family's from Lebanon. If we greet people, a really common way to greet people is an expression called kifak. Kefek. And it basically means like, hey, what's up? How's it going? It's a very casual way to say it. If you go to Iraq, instead of kifak, a way they'll greet people is shlonek, which is a really beautiful expression. It literally translates to, what color are you today? Which is a really fun way to say it. And then if we go to North Africa, in Algeria, they'll say washrak. So they all mean, hey, how are you? How's it going? But you can hear the different pronunciations from those three countries and a lot of other examples as well. So those are our two big unifying factors, and our last unifying factor is membership in the League of Arab States, or the Arab League for short. And the Arab League has been around since 1945 and helps with economic, cultural, and political issues that may arise. That's not really with the people, it's more of like a government structural kind of thing at the top, but it is one of our unifying factors. So these are our three unifying factors. The last thing really quickly with the map is to highlight that there's a lot of diversity with this community, right? So when we're talking Arab Americans, even though like we're talking as a whole community, there's a lot of differences between the folks that live in these countries and hence Arab Americans as well. You have folks that don't identify as Arab who live in these countries. You have a variety of religions. You have a variety of experiences. You have a variety of sexualities and economic status. And so the community is extremely diverse, just like any other community. Now, religion is often thought of as one of our unifying factors. Even amongst our own community, we often think religion unifies us, and it's not necessarily a factor, right? Although you do have folks that might gravitate towards one religion over the other, specifically Islam, you also have a lot of other religions. So looking at this chart, if you can see it, what are some things you notice on the map? That's okay. Well, even with the key, what do you notice on the key, even if you can't see it clearly? Very good. So there's a lot of green on our map, and you can also see different shades of green, right? So green represents Islam, and while you have a lot of green, you have various shades of green. So even within Islam, as a religion, there's different sects and ideas and traditions and beliefs, right? So even within Islam, there's a lot of diversity, and even beyond that, you can also probably notice other colors. You'll see pink and purple and brown and orange and other colors, which references the different other religious groups that live there. So you have a large Arab Christian population in places like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and other places. You also have Arabs who are Jewish as well, which is somewhat of a misconception, but you do have, or not a misconception, you have people who don't know that necessarily. It's not common knowledge, but you do have Arab folks who are Jewish. In many places like in Yemen, Tunisia, Morocco, and many other parts of the Arab world. And then, of course, you have other religions that Arab folks will connect to outside of these kind of major monotheistic religions. So again, while many folks are Muslim, you do have a lot of religious diversity. And if we look at Arab Americans in the US, it's really split. About 50% of Arab Americans are Christian and 50% are Muslim, right? Now, we're going to zoom out of this part of the world for a moment and look at Muslims worldwide. And I kind of like to highlight the fact that Arab does not equal Muslim and Muslim doesn't equal Arab. But if you think of the worldwide Muslim population across the globe, what region, what continent, what countries have really big Muslim populations on Earth? Again, you can name continents, countries, regions, but where are lots of Muslim populations in our world? Very good. So a lot in like sub-Saharan Africa, absolutely. Where? Very good, Asia, right? So if you look at this, you'll see the vast majority of Muslims in the world are actually located in Southeastern Asia, right? So countries like Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, these countries have very, very large Muslim populations, but of course they're not Arab countries. Same with sub-Saharan Africa. You have a large Muslim population in sub-Saharan Africa, but they're not necessarily Arab folks. Some people may identify as Arab in these regions, but most of them probably would not, right? And it has to do with our three unifying factors that we talked about. So here's our little cheat sheet to kind of wrap this piece up before we get into more of the storytelling components. If we look here, again, many folks are Muslim who are Arab, but again, it's not 100%, a lot of religious diversity. And Arabs only make up a very small fraction of Muslims worldwide. Arabs are only about 15 to 20% of the global Muslim population, so we're a minority when it comes to Muslims. And then again, if we bring it back to the US, we're really split. About 50% of Arab Americans are Christian and 50% are Muslim. So, now it's on to me. So this is me, right? So I'm up here. I want to introduce myself a little bit more, just some of the identities that I share. I'm here. I recently got married in June, so that's a really, really big part of my identity. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I got married June 1st of this year, and so being a spouse is one of my newer identities that I have brought on. And you can see my family here. So my makeup, I'm half Sicilian, and I'm half Lebanese. And for me, my Lebanese, my Arabic side has, I'm very, very attached to that side, just growing up with my mom and my mom's side of the family, you can see mostly pictured here. It's a small fraction. Arab families are very large, but it's still a piece. Those are some of my core family members. That is much more of a stronger identity piece for me versus like my Sicilian side, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But so I had to have that up there. I was talking to my mom about this presentation, and she's like, "You should include a baby picture of yourself." And I'm like, "Why? That's not really relevant." And she's like, "Because you were a really cute baby. They probably want to see that, don't they?" And I was like, "Well, we'll test it out." If you take anything from the presentation, it's that I was a very cute child, according to my mom. And then, of course, a proud cat dad. You can see my little fur balls in the bottom corner. So a lot of different identities and also lots of spaces of belonging, right? And so for me, my biggest belonging spaces and the work that I've had to put into belonging really revolve around my two major identity pieces of being an Arab American and also being part of the queer community. And we'll come back to some of these as we go throughout the presentation. But we're going to be doing a lot of storytelling as we go throughout the presentation today, and it's always good to kind of talk a bit about what makes a good story. So I extend the question to you all. What do you think makes a really good story? Very good. Authenticity is really key. Very good. What else? And I'm not looking for buzzwords. I honestly just curious what you guys think. Very good. Using your own voice, sharing your own unique perspective. Very good. Anything else? Happy endings are always a nice added bonus, right? So there's lots of things that go into a story, right? So having a good story, having a good plot, having good like subject matter, right? Relatability, having that ability to, even if your story, like even if my story is Arab American, I should be able to tell my story and have it relate to non-Arab folks. So having that some pathway of relatability. Good structure, having good bones to the story, right? So kind of the beginning, setting the scene, this idea of like rising action, coming to some type of climax, some type of big aha moment or whatever, and then the falling action or the conclusion. So a good sound structure. Connection to audiences is also really important. So again, just really being able to connect to your audience. That's one thing that we really strive to do at the museum is make sure that the stories we're telling, even though they're all about Arab Americans, have different connection points. And we'll see some examples as we go throughout the presentation. Making it memorable, something that lasts and that you can take with you once you leave the museum. And then again, creating empathy, creating understanding that was kind of already mentioned, this idea of humanizing, authenticity, creating empathy is really, really key with telling stories. I pardon the unintentional effects of apparently flashing the words. So a little bit more about storytelling. So storytelling has the power to break down barriers, really create connection, and really build community, right? One of the things that we strive to do at the museum is really use storytelling as a way to obviously make points about the Arab American community, but also to connect to other communities as well. Primary sources are really, really key for us at the museum and just in general the work that I do, being able to use primary sources, oral histories that we've collected. We have a really cool thing called digital scrapbooks, which I don't think I'm going to show just for time's sake, but this is all on the museum's website. So if you go to our website, you can look at our digital scrapbooks, and they're really awesome stories about being able to take old photos, put them in kind of a slideshow format, and then narrate your own story kind of over them, and we're empowering our community to tell their story. The museum is primarily made up of personal objects that people have given us and oral histories, and so that's really we're trying to empower the community to tell their true, authentic voices and giving them the tools to be able to do that. Also, primary sources, oral histories, things that we've been able to collect are things that are really useful because you can't deny those experiences, right? Just as a quick example, we have stories from Iraq and Palestine and other moments of trauma, for example, where the narrative is like, oh, like with Iraq, for example, oh, the Iraqis were so happy to have us there because we liberated Iraq and we freed them from Saddam Hussein. Being able to use personal stories as a way to push back and to counteract those narratives are really, really useful. It's like, really? Well, here's a bunch of resources that share that, people suffered in this way and continue to suffer in this way. And so using personal stories is a really great way to bring light to different opinions that are not super mainstream, right? And then again, creating positive narratives, creating positive stories, and also creating a sense of belonging. Being able for the public, as an Arab American, being able to hear these stories is a really, really powerful tool. In my last presentation, and before we get to immigration, I shared a lot about myself, and I'll give you a condensed version. But as a young Arab American kid, I never really saw myself reflected in the narrative that's being told about Arab Americans. And even as a kid, I was very excited about my Arabic culture, my Lebanese identity, and as I showed you, I'm very close to my Arabic side. And as a kid, I was super excited about that. And then as I got a little older, I got a lot of pushback from it. First off, growing up as a Lebanese kid here, nobody knows what Lebanon is or was, especially younger kids. And so I got confused for calling myself a lesbian quite often. People kind of conflated the two words. I was like, oh, wait. So I'd have to kind of, no, Lebanese, here's what Lebanese is. And so with that, and a lot of just, again, the stereotypes, sometimes if you bring up your Arabic or Arabic language, there's the deliberate mispronunciation of words with certain sounds coming out of that, the botching of being Lebanese and things like that. And so I really kind of went into my shell for a while, and I was like, oh man, this isn't necessarily the most friendly environment. So I reverted to my Italian side. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm Lebanese, but I'm also Sicilian. We're pretty cool, yeah, like tough macho guys and mobsters and pasta. That's cool, right? And so I remember kind of putting that more forward than like my Lebanese side or whatever. And then 9/11 happened, and I doubled down on my Italian heritage because I was like, no, because again, then all the stereotypes come out, like, questions of like, is Osama bin Laden your uncle? Where is he? Just really negative stereotypes, and also really just not super friendly comments towards the general Middle East and Arab American community. I mean, I remember being in class one time, and this was right after 9/11, and there were kids that were like in a classroom setting, like the teacher was present. We were talking about something completely random, and somebody had just said, "Why don't we just bomb and nuke the whole area?" Nobody batted an eyelash. The teacher was like, all right, let's get back. Let's focus on, the curriculum and all that. And I'm just sitting there. It's like, oh, wow. Like, that really affects, like, a person, right? And anyways, to fast forward, as I mentioned in the last session, what I did is I went to my own personal sources. I went to my grandparents, my grandfather specifically, and some of my aunts and uncles, and I said, people are saying all these negative things about what it means to be Lebanese, what it means to be Arabic, what it means to speak Arabic, what it means to eat hummus, which we all love. So why are we hating on hummus? But like they're saying all these negative things about all these different pieces of my culture. I don't even know what it means to fully be Lebanese. Tell me, educate me. And so my jiddu, which is Arabic for grandfather, my jiddu took me under his wing and said, here's what it means to be Arabic. Here's my interpretation. And he showed me the rich history that we have as a community, the fact that the Arab world, you have the invention of algebra, which usually when I say that on tour, all the kids boo me. Like, oh, you guys created algebra, thanks a lot. But there is the achievement of creating algebra, building some of the first astrolabes in the sciences, medical advancements, the invention of coffee, which comes from Yemen. The drink that we enjoy today has its roots in Yemen, right? So all these really beautiful, rich things that come from the Arab world, my grandfather started to tell me about it, and that kind of inspired me to put my Lebanese authentic self forward and create my own sense of belonging with my family, and then eventually be able to connect to other Arab Americans in my networks, more so specifically in college, but it gave me the courage to embrace that side, to go back to embracing that side of me. And that's also what further continued to push me to do the work that I do today, because I still remember how I felt as a kid not seeing any reflection, and then how I felt when I learned about who I was, and then also even as a guest at the Arab American National Museum, I was so inspired by the beauty that's there and seeing names that I have in my family and seeing the little country of Lebanon highlighted. It was such a source of pride that's why I continue to do the work and really tell these stories and help create a sense of belonging, not only for my immediate Arab American community, but to also bring others into the fold as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those stories that help to create a sense of belonging and a safe space, not only for our community, but for other communities as well. One of the stories I think that's really, I don't want to say fun, but one of the most impactful stories I think we have at the museum is the story of Zamori. Zamori is the first recorded Arabic speaker who comes to North America. He's from Morocco, which is in North Africa, and he comes to North America in the 1500s, around 1528 specifically. And now you all have to guess why Zamori from North Africa is coming to North America in the 1500s. What's happening in the world between some parts of Africa and North America 500 years ago? Very good, right? So Zamori was an enslaved person, and he was captured by the Portuguese, traded against his own free will, traded to the Spanish, and the Spanish were the ones that brought him over to North America. We know a lot about Zamori because of the Spanish documentation. We know that he was a translator. Zamori picked up, obviously knew Arabic, but he picked up Spanish, he picked up some of the indigenous languages, and was able to be a translator or a mediator between the various groups, the indigenous populations and the Spanish. He was also an explorer, not of his own free will, of course, but he journeyed and led many expeditions on behalf of the Spanish, traveling over 6,000 miles of territory on foot. And you can see this map here, his pathways here in Texas and down into Mexico and also present-day Arizona. So he led many expeditions, again, not of his own free will. He was also a medicine man. He was seen by some of the indigenous communities as a healer, somebody that could kind of cure them of the diseases, my guess is brought by the Spanish, right? So really, really important guy, not only because our own community does not know this, but again, this is one of those stories that's a connection point. So we've had really good conversations at the museum about how Zamori's enslavement as an Arabic speaker obviously relates to other communities' experiences as being enslaved and whatnot. So he's been a really great connection point so that we can weave together narratives from different communities that have similar experiences, right? And so our goal always at the museum is to utilize these stories to insert our story into the larger fabric that exists, not to take away, but to add to the richness of these types of stories. Also, a lot of people don't realize that Arabic speakers have been here for a very, very long time. We have a very rich history in this, in this continent and even beyond that. There's a few different time periods of Arab immigration, and I don't want to do this like standard luxury in terms of time periods, but just to frame us really quickly, and then to get to some of the narratives. Our first time period that we see the first large bulk of Arab immigrants is really 1880s to 1920s. This is when we see the first large bulk of Arab immigrants, about 95,000 folks, mostly from Lebanon and Syria, coming during this time period. The story that's attached to this time period is the story of Anna Yusuf. This is one of my favorite stories in the museum, and I think it again showcases the power of storytelling and belonging and representation in big historical events, right? So this is a little, kind of the same vein as Zamori, but a little bit different. So the story is about these folks pictured here, Anna Yusuf and her family. And Anna Yusuf was one of about 150 Arabs on board the Titanic. Now, we all know the story of the Titanic, I assume. We've all seen many of the many lovely movies that are made about the Titanic. What you may not realize, though, of course, is that there were over 150 Arabs on board the Titanic, which is it's a pretty sizable number. Only about 29 of them survived, including Anna Yusuf here. And when she deboarded, when she got to the U.S., she settled in Michigan, I think somewhere on the west side of the state. Dogwiak? I'm not going to... Thank you. That place. Yeah. Is it close? It's southeast Michigan, so around Benton. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. I've always wondered where that's at because it's on our plaque. I'm like, I don't know where that's at. But okay. Thank you. So she settles in that city, and before she passes away, she meets with some of our Access leadership team. Access is kind of our parent organization, and she tells the story about what her experience was like on the Titanic. And there's always one really beautiful scene in the movie where people are dancing. If you remember the scene in the Titanic, it's right before the ship hits the iceberg. There are people dancing, there's a party happening, music's playing, our characters are dancing and having a great time. And Anna says that they got that from a source, right? That actually happened on the ship, but according to Anna, what the movies left out is why they were gathered in the first place. And according to Anna, at least, the reason they were gathered is because it was a Lebanese reception. There was a wedding that had just taken place on the ship, and it was the Lebanese wedding reception taking place, and that's why people were gathered and dancing and things like that. So again, we know these big historical events, but our goal is to insert this Arab American story into that larger fabric, and there's really easy ways, relatively easy ways to do that. Talking about historical events, being able to, like, again, slip a couple of personal narratives into that story. Our second time period is from the 20s to the 60s, and it's made up of two major groups. One is folks called as part of a brain drain phenomena. Any guesses as to who might be coming during a brain drain time period of immigration? Say it again? Good. Scholars, doctors, engineers, very educated folks, right? So that's kind of part of the brain drain phenomena. It's a much smaller group of folks than in our first time period. And then also Palestinian refugees, right? And so we have this story here because, again, sometimes it's really hard to talk about things like Palestine that are happening, but we should, right? And so when it comes to this idea of this sense of belonging, running away from controversial, what people may see as controversial stories and subjects is something that we shouldn't run away from, right? So being able to hear and elevate Palestinian voices is something that is very essential. And if you're hoping to create a circle of inclusion, a circle of belonging, a circle of people feeling comfortable to be able to engage with you, making sure you're including all of those voices is something that is really, really essential, right? It's not like in the time that we're in now, because Palestine is on a lot of our community's minds, skirt-tailing and kind of skipping around it and not talking about it at all is not going to create a sense of belonging and a sense of safety for your community. People are going to realize what's happening really quickly. Now, again, my job is not to tell you that you need to do X, Y, and Z, but it's for you all to maybe figure out how you involve these types of stories. Schools have a lot of different policies, so again, how can you make sure that you're making the Arab American community feel a sense of belonging and a sense of inclusion without maybe breaking policy or without rattling the boat too much. And sometimes you can't. You have to rattle the boat. And again, when it comes to stories about like Ahmed Ibrahim, rightfully so to rattle the boat, right? And so we talk about his story about, coming over from Palestine. He's from a very small village called Jimsu, and he's born in 1922. In 1948, when Israel is created, it causes many Palestinians, including Ahmed Ibrahim, to be forcibly removed from his land. And so we talk about how he ends up going to a refugee camp. He only grabs a very few small objects with him. He grabs a vial of dirt. He grabs the key from his homeland. So if you're Palestinian, many Palestinians bring their keys with them, and it's something that is one of the most important objects that they have. And he brings a rock and like a couple of very few small items. And so having stories like Ahmed Ibrahim is really, really important because, again, with everything going on right now in Palestine, there's a lot of effort in, again, multiple circles to suppress these voices or, again, skirt tail them and just like, oh, look over here, this is nice, let's talk about this. Using stories like Ahmed Ibrahim, it's not controversial, right? You can't deny Ahmed's experiences, and this is something that you see in many, many stories. So again, there's ways to bring up stories without involving politics. When we tell his story, we never say, oh, the US is XYZ and they're doing bad politics. Like, it's just purely Ahmed's story, and it allows people to draw their own conclusions and also see the humanity in his story. I'll speed through this last couple of time periods, but our third time period is from the 1966 till the 1990s. And this is just another example of a story that, again, kind of weaves together these different narratives. So you're looking at an image of a cover of a magazine that highlights the story of Naji Daifullah. Naji is from Yemen, and when he comes to the U.S., he goes right to California to work in the farms. He goes to work in the farms in California. While he's there, he's alongside other Arabic speakers, Spanish speakers, and people who speak English. And so he very quickly learns English, learns Spanish, and he's able to help corral a lot of different groups to join the United Farm Workers Union. This union was to help fight for better working conditions, better pay, better treatment, and he helped rally a lot of these workers. Now, he also ends up marching along Cesar Chavez. We may know Cesar Chavez from our history books, very influential, very important guy, but again, we may not know the Arab story that can help elevate that story, right? So again, not to take away, but to add the Arab American story. So Najee ends up marching alongside Cesar Chavez, fighting for these better working conditions and better rights. Unfortunately, Najee is killed in the earlier days of the protest. He's killed by a deputy sheriff during one of these protests, but his legacy still lives on. He's still remembered for his major contributions that he's done for the United Farm Workers Union that continues to live on until today. And then our fourth time period is from now, 90s until present day. I won't read the quote, but I think this quote is also very powerful. So again, having these narratives is super important, and it helps to build an environment of belonging and seeing yourself reflected in stories, exhibits, people, things like that. But this quote is highlighting this individual who went to Chicago, was a refugee, and now settled in Chicago, and she longs to go back home. She wishes she could go back to her homeland, especially with the narrative of sometimes there's some anti-immigrant rhetoric out there, and I think this is a really powerful story to use, that people would love to go back to where they came from if they don't want to come here, but unfortunately sometimes they can't due to circumstances outside of their control. So again, using stories like this I think is a really, really powerful way to bring to light these important perspectives. Bit of fun trivia before we go on to the next piece. So we've talked about these 4 different time periods of Arab immigration, and you can see our map that has large populations of Arab folks. Really quickly, any guesses as to what state in the whole US might have the biggest population of Arabs throughout it? So Michigan is a great guess. It's kind of a trick question. Michigan is number 2 in population. If it's not Michigan, who might it be? Very good, California, right? So California is home to the largest population of Arab Americans. It's just a very large state, so it has a lot of Arab Americans, but Michigan is number 2 in population and number 1 in concentration. So Michigan has the largest concentration of Arab Americans, mostly in the Metro Detroit area, but of course all spread throughout the state as well. So who tells our story for us if we don't create these narratives, if we don't create a sense of belonging, if we don't elevate our story? What kind of folks, what kind of entities may tell our story for us if it's not us? Okay, good. So educators can step in and tell our story for us, sometimes in a great way. Yes. Yes. So if people have the materials to be able to do that, then that's wonderful. What if those materials don't exist, though? Where are they getting their information from if they can't find legitimate sources like the museum? Very good. So the media sometimes is front and center for filling in those gaps, right? Media, news organizations, things like that. So we're going to take a quick look at stereotypes and how these stereotypes work, right? So these are just some questions to ponder. When you think about some of these things, when you hear Arabic being spoken in a movie, when you see somebody praying who might be Muslim, when you see a woman wearing hijab, when you hear music that's being played, when you see the movie start off in a vast desert, are these things mostly like positive, fun portrayals in films, or are they not necessarily positive? Usually negative, right? Again, in more Hollywood cinema, right? So they're usually more negative contexts. Either they're outwardly negative, or they're like an extra character. There's a scene of somebody praying and there's no context. They're not an important character, right? They're just kind of filler, right? And so Arabs are shown in 2 different ways here. So we're going to take a quick look at how the media kind of frames Arab voices and why it's so important that we create our own narrative, right? So really quickly, looking at these images, what are some things you notice? Okay, good. So you notice hijabs, you notice people that are covered in some of them. Where you only see the eyes, these 2 pictures here, this is something called niqab, right? So it's hijab, but it's a different form of hijab, I guess, if you will. But that's an example of niqab. Good. So what else do we see? Very good. So we have women kind of here in the bottom left, and also here off to the right that are seen as very hypersexual, belly dancer, very seductive. Okay, good. What else do you see? Very good, yeah. So you see this, again, hyper macho Arab masculine kind of guy. Very good. What else? Very good. Very good. So this idea of either women are super hypersexual or they're covered and oppressed, but either way they're oppressed, right? They're tied to the man, they're tied to the system that's keeping them down, right? And so this is one look at how Arabs are showcased, right? And how the media showcases this. And I've had a lot of questions from folks who have asked me questions about belly dancers and asked me questions about, women who wear hijab and things like that. And that's because, again, if you don't know Arab Americans, if you're not getting these stories, if you're not getting accurate information, if you're not creating this sense of inclusion and belonging and then spreading that out to community, you're getting folks that are just digesting Hollywood cinema and unfortunately digesting these stereotypes. Again, take the Arab component out of this, include really any other character, from an ethnic racial group or even women in general. Think about how women and African Americans and Hispanic, Latino folks and Asian Americans are showcased in film. There's unfortunately a lot of parallels, right? But this is just kind of showcasing the Arab perspective. So on one hand, we're very sexualized, very hypersexualized or mysterious, right? Even women wearing niqab in this are seen as very mysterious and sexual a little bit as well, right? And then the Arab mind also, again, this idea of very Orientalist, let's get in the mind of the Arab folks because they're so different from ours, right? So again, mysterious, hypersexual, also whitewashing, so you have some white folks that are playing Arab characters here. I know you probably can't see it well, but Joan Collins is not an Arab person, but she is playing a belly dancer here in this slide. So you have this idea of fair-skinned Arabs as being desirable as well, which is also problematic because you have Arabs who are as white as Joan Collins and on the opposite end of that spectrum, right? So that's one, right? And here we see again this mysticism come into play. We see it in Aladdin. We see it with magic carpets and the genies and things like that. So this is kind of the U.S.'s introduction to Arab folks, and then things shift, right? So if you look at these images, which you may or may not be able to see all of them, what are you noticing here on these images? Good, so lots of violence, okay. What else? Good observation, how so? You're right. Nobody rides a camel down New York City, right? This is not a thing that happens, right? So yeah, same with the beard. Also, you probably can't see it very well, but the guy that has the bandana, I think this is Don't Mess with the Zohan. I think the Arabic letters are not even connected. So yeah, making a mockery, I think, is a really good observation, right? The camels, the beards, the over-the-top, the characters who are comedic idiots, basically, right? People with no substance. What else? What else do you see? Lots of weapons, lots of guns, swords, some type of weapon, bombs, absolutely. Anything else? Okay, good. So possibly some possession, possibly some demonization of some of these characters, for sure. You also have children that are immune from this as well. You see a little girl holding a gun, so that even like little kids are not immune from being the bad guy, the terrorist, the violent individual, right? And so this really happens when we have things happening politically in our world, right? We see, oil, the oil embargo. We see, foreign policy and interventions. We see Palestine being ethnically cleansed, and so you see people seeing violent Palestinians fighting for the land, but in certain contexts, it's seen as, again, terrorism and whatnot. You see perceptions of Islam start to make a play here as well. So again, this, like, as it's portrayed in Hollywood, this backwards, barbaric land with these barbaric people, with this barbaric religion, all these kinds of pieces. And so that's when the shift happens to more dangerous others versus exoticism, right? And so we see the reason we talk about this is because this results in hate crimes. It results in people judging folks based on what they look like. You know, anti-Arabness, Islamophobia affects not only folks who are Arab and Muslim, but folks who are perceived to be Arab and Muslim as well, right? You know, we also see immigration barriers. We see things happening like policies of the Muslim ban and keeping immigrants who are coming through Mexico and Central America, which also is lumped with Arabs as well, right? We hear this rhetoric all the time. So now it comes to like taking back our narrative, right? And that's really why the museum is here, is to help uplift and create these different types of narratives, the reality of who we are as a community, and really wanting to create a sense of belonging. And so when we do storytelling, when we tell stories about who we are, a lot of what we focus on is casting a really broad net onto our community, right? So it's not enough for us to say, you know, let's highlight Arabs who came here and, you know, just focus on people from Lebanon and Palestine, but really trying to cast a really, really wide net as to the stories that we tell. We've learned a lot, and I shared this in the last session, is we are taking back control of our narrative, but we're doing it in a very deliberate way. So some context. Back in the day in the museum, I think I had mentioned this, we were kind of seen as like, you know, we're peaceful, we're peaceful people, we're not terrorists. It was right after 9/11 had happened, and so we were like, oh no, we're not terrorists, we're cool, you know, come have hummus and hang out with us and all that. Now we've shifted, right? Now, 20 years after the museum's been established, we're taking back control of our narrative and being unapologetically Arab American. And not only doing that, we're being much more thoughtful in the stories that we collect. So as an organization who talks and represents the Arab American community, we've also, rightfully so, sometimes are called out for not being inclusive. When the museum was built, most of our connections were to Arabs from the Levant regions, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, kind of this area. Demographics were also very different 20 years ago, but nonetheless, the community has changed, and we are trying to keep up with it, but we've been called out, again, very rightfully so, for not necessarily always including different perspectives of the Arab American community. So including folks from Sudan and Somalia and other parts of North Africa, highlighting Black Arab, Afro-Arab perspectives, highlighting the queer community in the Arab American community, highlighting very devout religious folks and very, very secular folks, right? So our goal is to take back our narrative, and in doing so, really trying to be very, what's the word I want to use? Not careful. Thank you, intentional. Being very intentional with the stories that we're telling. And so it's really hard to change museum exhibits. That's a very costly thing. So that's where our digital scrapbooks come into play that I mentioned. That's where collecting oral histories has come into play, where we're able to collect a wide variety of oral histories, collecting objects. We're continuously collecting objects from folks to help tell a more inclusive story. We've created videos as well. One thing that we did, we got a small grant that allowed us to work with 4 different filmmakers. Each filmmaker could create a 5-minute film that focused on a different perspective that we didn't already have. So we curated, we worked with 4 filmmakers, and they included films from youth, which we don't have a lot of youth voices. So we had a video about Arab American youth and some of the issues they're facing. We had one on entrepreneurship. We had one on Sudan and the relationship between being Black and Arab and how those relationships sometimes shift. Also anti-Arab racism as well. We talked a lot about anti-Blackness in the Arab community in that video. And then lastly, a video on the queer community, which was really, really nice to have as well. So again, being very intentional to tell these stories and making sure that we are being as inclusive and creating a sense of belonging in every aspect of the word, right? Yes, okay. Well, let me ask you this. Oops. Before we go to the last couple of slides, what are some ways that we as people and the communities that you all are connected to, what are some ways that you can think that you can push the narrative of inclusivity, belonging, fighting against stereotypes within your own networks? What are some things you all have the power to do to take back your narrative, or to again, continue that mission of being a belonging, inclusivity? So what can you all do? Very good. So bringing people who have not traditionally had a seat at the table, bringing them to join in on the conversations. Very good. What else? Very good. Holding yourself accountable to the biases that you have, absolutely, 100%. Very good. Absolutely. Wanting to learn cultural understanding, admitting that you don't know everything about other communities, let alone your own community. I know that's something that we're seen as the experts on Arab Americans, and I think we do a great job, but we're talking about people from 22 different countries. It's hard to be an expert in everywhere. So knowing where your shortcomings are, being okay with that, learning, educating yourself, recognizing your biases, absolutely, right? One thing that we talked about in the last session is really being very intentional, so creating partnerships with organizations, right? If you want to, one thing that we always hear from folks, which is great, is they are like, oh, you know, there's an Arab community really close to us, but we don't ever see them in our programs. We don't ever interact with them. They kind of stay in their own area. It's like, well, what have you done to reach out to them? Like, oh, well, we put on events and all that. I'm like, well, are those the events that the community needs or wants? And they're like, well, that's a good question. So doing the work, I think, is a really big part of this, and taking back our narrative is doing your own homework, right? And one thing that we have found that's been really, really beneficial to helping to create an inclusive and a sense of belonging for our community is talk to those community members who don't come through our door. So we've been very intentional about creating community dialogue circles, and my colleague who was hired to do this specifically as our community engagement organizer, she held a focus group, and she worked with mostly Black Arab folks and other communities that are not as well represented, and she said, basically, why don't you all come to the museum? And they're like, because we thought this was a museum for people from Lebanon and Syria. We're not anywhere in your stories. Your programming doesn't reflect us. The programs that you have aren't of interest to us. They don't cater to our needs. And so we've been very intentionally trying to shift to do more of that work. So that's where the videos come into play, where we brought in Sudanese perspectives, queer perspectives, things like that. Having more diverse panelists and programs. Like when we're talking Arab American communities, having other voices within the othered community is really helpful. Well, that's a bad way to put it. But marginalized communities, bringing those stories up to the front is great, but also finding other marginalized voices within the marginalized community is also, that's a much better way to put it, is a way to continue to bring those stories of inclusivity, right? So it's not just enough to have a workshop on Arab Americans once a year, and it's not enough to have a bunch of like straight, white-passing Syrian Americans, which are great, but can you diversify your panel? Can you bring folks from different parts of the Arab world, different faiths, different age ranges, different socioeconomic status, different gender, different dress, different et cetera, right? In addition to that, and to kind of wrap up this piece, so this is also how we can help fight these stereotypes and advocate for ourselves, again, along with what we had just talked about, is advocacy, doing social media campaigns. Education is always, always very key. If you find that you're in spaces that your colleagues don't necessarily know too much about Arab Americans, come to the Arab American National Museum. Even if you don't want to come to us, which is rude but understandable, we can send you a list of books. We can send you a list of films. We can send you resources that you can utilize into the classroom. I'm, again, curator of education, so my work is really focused on outreach, but also creating resources for folks. We have a really great library that you can utilize. We also have a lot of our objects are digitized on our collection, or in our collection. So you can go to the museum's website, look at the objects that we have, and if you want to type in like Yemen or coffee cup or Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, you can type that into our digital archive and you can find objects related to those things. So you can very easily pull up objects to include. And then lastly, creating our own representation, right? So writing and directing our own films and stories, having comedians out there, journalism, talk shows, radio hosts, podcasts, things like that, and then documentaries and reality TVs. Reality TV is questionable, but documentaries are very helpful. So like we've used documentaries to help dispel stereotypes. We've hosted a lot of documentaries which really help to elevate the voice of the community that you're trying to portray. And so utilizing these tools and utilizing the museum is a really, really great way to help build inclusive communities and help build different perspectives and, again, create a welcoming space for folks. I feel like I talked a lot. I will pass it back over to Jamelia, or if folks have questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. Or we can just talk about my cats some more too, that's also fine. That's my second slideshow, pictures of my cats. Yeah.
You know I got teacher voice. Thanks so much for all the information that you provided. I do have a question, and it's okay if you may not know this off the top of your head, but when you were going through the slides of how media has differed in various decades, I'm wondering if you can speak, if you know at all, how that has differed post 9/11 and maybe even post October 7th in the most recent times, like how that has impacted different media styles.
Sure. No, that's a great question. I mean, I can't give you scholarly information on it. I can give you some of the perspectives that I have seen. After 9/11, things I think were rough for a while, but I think people, because the Arab American community, as time has gone on, has become much more organized and much more fighting for advocacy, much more on the political spectrum, and so post 9/11, things were rough for a few years, but after that, people started getting more into the filmmaking scene, having higher positions in like Hollywood cinema, and trying to hold those studios accountable. Like even with the Aladdin movie that came out, they actually consulted with folks to make sure that it wasn't like uber offensive, right? There's still a lot of work to be done, but there's a bit more holding folks' feet to the fire than pre 9/11 when there wasn't such a strong representation. With October 7th, some of that has gone out the window. I don't think there's movies necessarily being made that quickly, but the perspectives have definitely shifted. With October 7th, you have a re-demonization of Palestinians and anybody who is conflated to be Palestinian, or even the whole community of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans even are being targeted because of that. So I feel like with October 7th, we're slipping back. And not to get political at all, but what's interesting is like you're getting it from multiple sides. So it's not just a conservative viewpoint and a liberal viewpoint, and you're seeing it from both sides. I've had more fights with liberals in the last a year than I have with my conservative friends or whatever. And so you're getting it from multiple sides. I think the nice thing is that there is a lot of Palestinian stories that already exist, and there's stories that are continuing to be churned out, and I think with globalization and social media, it's a little easier to manage. Like the museum was just a part of, which was my program, the museum was part of a global screening on November 2nd with Palestine Cinema Days. And because they couldn't hold their film festival like they normally do around that time, they asked any organization who wanted to participate to screen. They had a selection of like 4 or 5 different films you could choose from, and we were one of, I think, over 100 cinemas around the world that had screened a Palestinian film in solidarity. So you're seeing things are a little bit bleak now, but you're also seeing communities kind of doubling down and digging their heels and not backing down. It's very different. Post 9/11, again, like I said, museum was very like, hey, we're cool. Now we're unapologetically supporting our community as Arab Americans and as Palestinians, versus before where we would be like, let's just, peace, whatever. Now it's like, no, there's genocide happening. We are going to support the Arab American community here to cater to their needs and to provide a space for them. Like we have a lot of Palestinian groups using our space at a very low or free rate because the community's in need. So things have definitely changed. I hope that answers your question. So, of course, that was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I want to say thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity to learn more. And thank you for asking me to go. Okay, so we are educators, right? And thinking of our youth and educating them, right? Adults may not always do what's right and what's needed. What is the best way, because it's not in the curriculum, right? What is the best way to get accurate history, accurate information out to our youth? Because with digital literacy, you can't always count on Instagram or TikTok or, whatever it may be. Like, what would be the best way? I know.
Really good question.
Do you have a toolkit? Like, what do you have?
We do. So, sorry, my eyes starting to water. We do. We have actually just a really emotional question. I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. My eyes water sometimes randomly. Anyways, yeah, the museum does have a really beautiful toolkit. I love that this is being recorded too, so everyone can see me wiping my eyes. The museum has a really awesome toolkit on the museum's website. So if you go to the museum's website at arabamericanmuseum.org, there's a whole tab for educators. And we've created lesson plans for folks to be able to utilize in the classroom that aligns with K through 12 curriculum standards. We're working on new resources as well. Most of what we have right now aligns with social studies standards, but we're working on creating one in the arts and the sciences, in math. So we're recognizing that we can't just focus on social studies, that we need to kind of be more broad. We're hoping to create and release, well, we've already created, we just need to do some fine tuning, but we have a lesson plan about Zaha Hadid and architecture. That's for K through 5 kids. So it's, Zaha Hadid, architecture, science. We're also working on a lesson plan about how to teach about Palestine in a again, non-political way, but really dispelling the stereotypes that exist. And so most of what we have is on the museum's website. So it's lesson plans, it's the digital scrapbooks, our oral histories. We also do teacher PD as well. So we just hosted a teacher PD on Election Day for about 80 teachers. And it was all centered on how to include art in the classroom, so including dance and music and mosaic tile crafts that we offer at the museum, how to incorporate Arab voices in art and whatnot. So there's lots of options. Also, the great thing with the museum is we're able to kind of cater to what the needs are. So if you reach out to me and you're like, oh man, we really need this thing, we're able to help create something unique for you as an experience.
Thank you.
We'll give our folks online a little bit more time to submit a question if they'd like. Other questions in the room? All right. Seeing none. Again, thank you, Dave, for your time and just being able to kind of pour into us, educate us, and learn, and us able to learn more about you and the work that you do. So again, thank you all for joining us. We will have a last slide to provide feedback. So please let us know how we're doing, if there's things that you want to incorporate or partner with. Those are all information that can be included in the feedback. But again, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. And we do look forward to coming to plan a visit. So I guess we can wrap up. If you can share, how would one kind of set up a time for us to put together some sort of field trip so that we're able to come and experience the actual museum in person?
Sure, absolutely. So the most common thing that people do is spend like a little half-day workshop with the museum. People do a guided tour, which is around 60 to 90 minutes. We can also, it'll also include like a craft activity. We do like a really cool mosaic craft activity that we package actually and send to schools across the country. But we can do that in person where you get to make your own little mosaic tile. We can provide, also if you like Arabic food, we have some really great, we have our hands in a lot of different dishes and restaurants around the area. We can cater lunch for you. And then lastly, we usually wrap up with the traditional Arabic dance called debke, which is also a really awesome way to tell stories. The dance is very much rooted in being part of the land, being part of the culture, so we can also teach you some dance. But that would be my recommendation, is spend a half day with us, have some good food, have some good conversation. And if you want to book anything, you can reach out to me, or we have a form on our website under under the visit tab, where you can, there's a big blue button that says book a guided tour. You can click that and fill out the form, which is some basic information.
All right, so thank you for that preview. We are excited to come down and visit after the winter time. So yes, we will send out more information about how we will do that. But again, thank you for your time, and that concludes today's Diversity Lecture Series.
Thank you.